Hello, welcome to Miss Peepers Reading Corner. I'm Katrina, aka Miss Peepers. Let's talk about books. If you've been around for a little while, you may have seen me open books out of brown paper wrapping. I'm calling them my mysterious books for 2024. If you're new here, let me tell you what that is. So back in January of last year, I went to a used bookstore and found a stack of books sold as a pack that were wrapped in brown paper. There was a month on each spine, and there were 12 of them. The idea was to read one per month, and you didn't know what you were going to get. And so I was intrigued by this and I bought it. And I'm actually quite pleased with the result because I read a few familiar authors as well as some books that weren't even on my radar. And it was a great reading experience. I thought I'd wrap up in this video, how did I do across the entire year? So as I said, there were 12 books and I did not finish 2 of them. I read 9 and then there's one I didn't get to. So overall, I feel like that's pretty good considering they were books that I was not planning to read, but just unwrapped as we went. I will say one of the 9 that I finished this month instead of actually in 2024, but that's okay. Who's counting? I read it and that's what matters. So let's go from worst to best. Let's start with the books that I did not finish. The 2 books I didn't finish, I don't have anymore, so I'll put pictures of the covers up. I put them in the little free library in my neighborhood, so hopefully someone got them and they are in a happier home. Just because these books weren't for me doesn't mean that someone else wouldn't love them. So the first one is A Map of the World by Jane Hamilton. This is the story of a woman who is watching her friend's daughter along with her own daughter, and the friend's daughter dies in a tragic accident, and it's about the fallout from that, from the point of view just outside of the family that's directly affected. And I think for me, what prevented me from enjoying it and prevented me from finishing the book, I just kind of got bored. Apart from that initial action, the story moves incredibly slowly. I realized that I just didn't care about the main character at all, and so it was hard for me to follow this character through her intense grief and her depression, and I hesitate to say it like that because I don't want to come off as unfeeling. If you've seen my videos, you probably know mental health is very important to me, but the way it was written just did not grip me at all. It didn't seem interesting the way it was described, and so I didn't finish it. I might try another Jane Hamilton book at some point. I don't know what else she's written, but I know that she has other books, and so maybe something with a different topic would be more of interest because she is a good writer. The subject matter was not there for me. The other book that I DNF'd was Hood by Stephen R. Lawhead. And this was so disappointing to me because I love a Robin Hood story, and that's what this is. It's a retelling. And I was really hoping that it would just be this rollicking adventure because in my mind, that's what a Robin Hood story is. And maybe it would have gotten there, but the main character, the Robin Hood character, at the beginning of the story, he's just so spoiled and just negligent of other people, and you just don't really care about him. And I didn't feel like I had anything to really hold on to, and I did not want to follow this character through a fairly chunky book. So I guess the moral of that story is if you're not enjoying a book, if it feels like a slog to read it and you don't have to read it, then just stop. Someone else will probably enjoy that book, so find it a new home, send it out into the world, and then move on to the next thing. Now, there's one book that I did start, but I didn't, I soft DNF'd it, by which I mean I do want to read it properly at some point. I was having trouble getting into it. It was right at the end of the year, and that is Cold Sassy Tree by Olive Ann Byrne. This book is set in the early 1900s, and it follows a family that is beset by scandal in a tiny town in Georgia, the state, not the country. And I think the main thing that made this book hard for me to read in a time of a lot of activity and commitments and stress, because the end of the year turns into that a lot of the time for me, was that the accents, the Georgia accents, are written out. And so it was hard for my brain to follow it. And I think I mentioned this in one of my previous videos when I talked about this book, that when I started reading this book, that the Georgia accent is not one that I hear very much or have heard very much. And so, reading it, my brain doesn't translate it very well. So what I might do is watch the movie adaptation of this, which, by the way, stars a very young Neil Patrick Harris. Go figure, along with, of course, other people. And I might try the adaptation first to kind of get a sense of not just the story, but get a sense of the voices of the characters, and then come back to it and read the book. Often I try to read the book before I watch the adaptation, but you know what? Life is short, and you got to do stuff in the order that makes sense to you. And sometimes watching the movie or miniseries, if that exists first, is better. So do what you need to do. So this is going back on my TBR shelf. I am going to try it again at some point, but for now, we're just setting it to the side. Now the 9 books that I did read. Now, I'm not going to go into extreme detail on any of these because I have talked about them in other videos. So I'll just go through them and I'll just give you my quick thoughts. First is Chocolat by Joanne Harris. Now, this was a reread for me. I read it many years ago. I don't even remember when. It's been a long time. And so it was exciting to read it again. Really enjoyed this. This is a quiet, romantic, kind of cozy story about a single mother and her daughter who moved to a tiny Catholic town right before Lent, and they are opening a chocolate shop. So we follow Vian, the main character, as she gradually makes her way into this community. She makes friends. She also makes a few enemies, and she leaves her mark on this town. As you can see, this is the movie tie-in cover. It was made into a film, which is also lovely. Different in a lot of ways, but still keeps the general vibe and themes. Good book, good movie. I do recommend. Next is The Number One Ladies Detective Agency by Alexander McCall Smith. It is a series of detective novels. This book follows a woman named Precious Ramotswe who decides to open a detective agency in Botswana, and she is the first female detective in the entire country. And it's told in kind of an episodic way, so even though it is a novel and there's definitely an order to it, she takes on multiple cases throughout the book. Some of them are quick and closed out neatly, and then others take a little bit longer, and then there's one that's kind of overarching throughout the entire book. I enjoyed this book a lot. I did question a bit that this African woman main character was written by a white British man. He did live in Africa for some time, so he's not pulling these anecdotes or experiences out of nowhere, but it does make me a little bit leery about how accurate this is, and I just personally do not know. And if you happen to know that and you're watching this, let me know in the comments. Should I continue with the series? Following that, we had another mystery, The Murder Room by P.D. James. Now, I adore P.D. James. This is following her detective, Adam Dalgleish. It follows a murder at a small museum that is run by a family of siblings, and the death triggers questions about wills and also whether this museum will continue on or be sold. There's already some infighting amongst the siblings when this death occurs. P.D. James was just a quintessential mystery writer. She started writing actually in middle age and publishing in middle age, which just goes to show it's never too late. And she ended up becoming one of the premier British mystery writers. Like, her name ends up next to Agatha Christie and Arthur Conan Doyle when you see lists of various famous British mystery writers. I've read a lot of her books. I have definitely not read all of them. She is always a delight, and 5-star right here. Up next, we have Second Chance by Jane Green. This was a completely different sort of book. This is, and this cover, I'm so sorry, this cover. If I'm holding this awkwardly, it's because I'm trying to prevent the glare. This is a very shiny cover. I had a lot of fun with this book. I wasn't really sure what to expect or whether I would like it. It definitely is the sort of book that's typically classified as chick lit, but that is such a broad category, and um, there's no such thing as man lit. It's just lit. So there's a lot of baggage with that genre. But this follows a group of friends who went to school together. They've gone their separate ways as adults. They don't really see each other very often, or they're not very much in contact. But one member of the friend group who was in contact pretty consistently with everybody has died, and they all come back home for the funeral and they reconnect and their stories intertwine. I liked this book a lot. I will say, check the content warnings on it because there are some serious topics that are handled around things like adultery and infertility and miscarriage. But overall, I felt like those topics were handled pretty well. These characters are not perfect. They're not meant to be. I would read Jane Green again, switching arms because my arm is getting tired, and also switching gears again to The Known World by Edward P. Jones. This book is historical fiction. It is set in the southern United States prior to the Civil War, in a fictional town in Virginia, and the story centers around a few people, but primarily a Black slave owner. And I'll be perfectly honest, when I read this book, this was the first time that I realized that some Black people owned slaves during that time, and it really surprised me. There's a little section in the back of my copy that gives you some information about the author, and there's some interview questions with him. And so Edward P. Jones wrote this book because a lot of people don't know that there were Black slave owners, and he wanted to explore that experience. He is a Black man as well. And so he wanted to explore that experience and consider what that part of society would be like. Of course, that did not happen often, not only for moral reasons, but also because slaves were expensive. And he gets into all of those aspects of slavery and of the society that built up around it in this book in a really touching and caring, and it's a difficult book to read in topic, not in words. The words flow very nicely, and it is beautifully written. But there are, of course, really heart-wrenching stories and themes in here. So definitely go in, look at content warnings. The topic of slavery should be enough to let you know that there's some difficult content in here, but definitely check warnings for all of the books, for any book that you read, if there are any topics that you prefer to avoid for any reason. But if that does not stop you, I will say this is well worth the read. It won a Pulitzer. I agree wholeheartedly. Not that my opinion on that matters, but just gorgeous, gorgeous book. All right, now we're back to mystery, and this is a little bit more of a mystery slash thriller. But this is The White Lioness by Henning Mankell, who's a Swedish author. This is part of his Kurt Wallander series. It starts with a woman's disappearance. She's a realtor. She went out to look at a house and she never came home. This book takes a lot of twists and turns, and it goes in directions that I was not expecting. And I don't want to say too much about that other than there's an international component that I did not see coming, even though I think it says it on the back, but I typically will read the back of a book when I buy it or when I acquire it, and then not again, and then I forget the details. So yeah, I skimmed the back of the book when I first opened the package, but then didn't really think about it until I read it, and love it. I love to operate that way. Anyway, lots of twists and turns, really engaging story, and three-dimensional characters, which is something that you don't always get in a mystery thriller. You can, and I love it when you do. Those are the best for me. But lots of fun. Do recommend. And this whole series is good. I haven't read every book in the series, but the ones that I have read have all been entertaining. Now we'll segue back to historical fiction with The Good Earth by Pearl S. Buck. This is set in China towards the end of the reign of the last emperor, right as the country's about to move towards a communist government. We're following a man who is a farmer. He is getting married in the first chapter, and it is a description of his life, a description of his family, and how their fortunes shift and change over the years, and what he does to build himself and his family and his land up. There's a lot in here about expectations and how what you expect from your life shifts as your fortunes shift. So, as our main character makes more money, he starts to expect finer things. It becomes second nature that certain things are going to be true, but he always comes back and feels best around the earth, the good earth. And I won't spoil it, but that ending, that ending got me right here. There are parts that are funny, there are parts that are sad, there are parts that are aggravating and made me yell at characters in the book. Why would you do this? Why are you like this? But it's just a really well crafted, as far as I can tell, because I'm not an expert in Chinese history, but it's a very well crafted depiction of that time period and very immersive. And so loved this book. We're back to thrillers. This one is called 3 Hours in Paris. It's by Cara Black. We're following a woman who's a sharpshooter. She's recruited by the British government during World War II to go to Paris to assassinate someone. And she doesn't know who it is at first, but she quickly finds out, and this is not a spoiler because it's in the first chapter, she finds out that she's supposed to assassinate Hitler. Of course, we know that Hitler was not assassinated in Paris. We know that she's going to miss. Again, that's all in the first chapter. So the book is following her attempt to escape after the failed assassination. She's dodging the German police. She's dealing with not really knowing what she's supposed to do next, and she's thinking on her feet. This was a lot of fun. It was high action, but also the main character is built out pretty nicely, and the antagonist, the German officer who's trying to track her down, is also a full person, which I really appreciated because it's very easy in a story like this, in a thriller in particular, to have your mustache twirling villain who's just really one dimensional, particularly a Nazi character. But the fact that the author decided to make him a human person, and make her a full human person as well, just it makes the story richer, and it makes the story more believable and also more meaningful. So I had a lot of fun with this, and so if you're looking for a thriller, this is a good one. And our last book is set in the same time period, in the same city, but is a completely different sort of novel, and that is Sarah's Key by Tatiana de Rosnay. Wow. Okay, I finished this book in January. I started it right at the end of December. This was my first 5-star read of the year. Yay. Oof, I'm probably going to do a full video on this. I'll try to keep my comments brief, but I did adore this book. It was so well done. We're following two storylines. In 1942, we're following a Jewish girl. Her name is Sarah, and she is part of a roundup of Jews in Paris that was perpetrated by French police. And she has left her brother behind at their home. He's hiding in a cabinet that she has locked because she does not know that she won't be able to come right back for him. So not only is she dealing with being a victim of the Holocaust, she's also worried about her brother. The story in 2002 follows a woman named Julia. She's an American living in Paris. She's a journalist. Her husband is French. They have a daughter, and she is assigned by her paper to write a story to commemorate the roundup from July 1942. And it is the first she's heard of this event, and she finds that there's a lot of information about it that she can find in books or on the internet, but she has trouble getting people to talk about it, including her husband and his family, because it is, of course, a source of national shame that it was perpetrated by French police. And so as she is digging into this history and trying to find out what happened and find stories for her article, she learns that her husband's family was involved in a very personal way in this event. And the first two things that you're thinking are not the way they were involved. Probably. If you're thinking the first two things that I was thinking, that's not how they were involved. I'm not going to spoil it, but it was a surprising twist for me. It's such a beautiful story, and a sad story, of course, and an important part of history to remember as well. And I feel that de Rosnay has handled this topic with a lot of respect and care. Again, content warnings. There's some really dark stuff in this book in both storylines, because Julia also has some experiences that are nothing like, of course, the Holocaust, but she has some difficult experiences as well. So just bear that in mind going in. But this is a gorgeous book. It 5 stars. Like I said, I would give it more stars if Goodreads would let me. So I'll just do it here. I'm going to give it 8 stars right now. You can't stop me, but it really is quite good, and I highly, highly recommend it. All right, so there's my stack of mysterious books. That worked out really well for me. I had no idea, as I said, going in, what was going to be in the packages. It was really great to see different authors, most of which I'd never heard of. Some of the books I'd never heard of. Let me know if you've read any of these books, what you thought of them. Keep reading, and I'll see you in the next one.